All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on, I think we're episode 191, 92, 93. I think it's 92 of Blowback Exposing Imperial Decline. And, I kind of picked the title of our broadcast, not today's title, but Blowback Exposing Imperial Decline, because it was so obvious, even years ago that, the empire was in decline, and it's just really seems to be accelerating. I mean, this whole war against Iran seems to, it's just going to really accelerate the decline of the Western Empire. But so I'm Billy Bob. I'm on the West Coast. I've got my co-host Ian Cummer. He is streaming live from a suburb in Moscow. It is 7 p.m. in Moscow. So when I say good morning, it's only morning for me. So it's evening for Ian, and we have viewers around the world. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. So the title for today's episode is the war against Iran a class struggle or a national struggle? And this is a title that I'm really enjoy discussing today. I've been writing a lot about this because, it's just kind of like the West is immersed in we can just call it a religion, the religion of liberalism. And liberalism creates a framework for understanding reality that is just incapable of understanding terms like class struggle, imperialism. Liberalism is a framework that trains people to see things through the perspective of nationalism. And the problem with nationalism is that it ignores class. And, class is a very important driver of current events, and specifically Western imperialism and the behavior of Western imperialism. It's really a class-driven structure. It's not a national-driven structure. But anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves. So no, Ian, thank you so much for joining me. I know you picked the title, which was you did me a great service by picking this title. And we want to talk first just about current events in a non-ideological way. There's really no such thing as non-ideological. But when we talk about what's going on in the war, that kind of is a different realm than ideology. So what is your general overview, general assessment of where we're at and where it might be headed with Iran?
Well, so we're day 9? I think we're day 9 in this because it's the end of February, beginning of March that the first missile set. I think it was March 1st.
I remember it was Saturday morning, and today's Tuesday morning. So it's like 7 days plus 2 or 3.
Yeah, so it was.
I could say day 10, maybe.
Yeah, it's 9 or 10 now. For something that was originally, as far as anyone can tell, it was originally meant to be 3 to 5 days. And all the commentary we've seen, it was very much Trump in his echo chamber, who, very excited with his success with Maduro, an in and out 20-minute adventure, literally, got a very cool, set of objectives done that he could tweet about. And, with all his all caps tweets that he likes to do, he got, it was a complete, for Trump, people nitpicked the success in Venezuela afterwards. They said, well, it wasn't, you captured the head guy, but you did not topple the government. You didn't put that opposition leader, Maria, whatever her name is, she's not, in fact, they didn't affect any kind of important change, so people nitpicked it. But I think when you're from the Trump perspective of how Trump sees the world, and I think also just his echo chamber, he has his inner circle of people who tell him things, so just this world that's built around him, it ticked all of the boxes of a successful military strike. What happened in Venezuela, and the big thing is there was no casualties on the American side. There were no losses, so complete success. And he was, as far as I can tell, he was trying to imitate that against Iran. And the problem is a lot of people, I mean, I would say not even a lot of people, but everybody with a couple brain cells to rub together. With the brains, God gave geese, as your grandma likes to say. So it's a much harder target. It's not actually, when you have an actual nation state with a stable government, with a stable bureaucracy, with a stable chain of command, as opposed to some of these other states, which are more like pseudo states or their family operations. We've talked about that in the show before, like with Syria, like with Saudi Arabia. Unfortunately, basically any of the Gulf states, if you remove that top guy or top family from play, the whole thing collapses because it wasn't a real government. It was just a family enterprise, if you will. So that guy flees the country. You can kind of put whoever you want in charge, some guy from the military or whoever. It's pretty easy. But when you have a real government,
Yeah.
it doesn't work that way.
100 million people.
You kill the top guy, you kill the top 5 guys, the top 10 guys. It doesn't matter because it's just other people get promoted and things carry on. And the important thing is they retaliate because it's a system that you can't. So like even the whole concept of a decapitation strike that we're all in love with, and we practice it on Arab states like Saddam Hussein against Libya. It worked in us, and we got this idea that it works on everybody. It's like, well, no, it doesn't. And there's no evidence to even think it would work on everybody. And it very often just achieves the opposite of what you wanted. You even look at other military operations, like you look at the Ukraine. They did not strike the Ukrainian Rada. They did not assassinate Zelensky, though they've certainly had opportunities to do so. They haven't because there's no. I mean, I don't think any smart person would say, well, that would collapse the Ukrainian war effort if we killed a couple leaders at the top. Well, no, it wouldn't, because it's obviously far beyond Zelensky, far beyond any one guy in Ukraine. So it's just, but we have this idea, oh, well, we can do that. And the other problem is that the more we look at it, we have to wonder, what was the planning that went into this? I mean, and there wasn't a backup plan. So it's like, okay, you're just going to kill Khamenei. I'm butchering his name, sure. Khamenei?
Khamenei? I don't know.
Khamenei, yeah, it's fun. I've only read it, unfortunately. I don't watch TV. I haven't heard anyone say it, but it's just like, okay, so if that doesn't work, you do this shock and awe thing on Saturday and Sunday, then it doesn't work. Well, what do you do? Blocking the state of Hormuz was a very obvious thing they would do. Striking U.S. military bases, which a lot of people pointed out are very vulnerable. Well, they did at least plan for that. It looks like they evacuated the bases, which is why there were so few casualties, because except that one case where they actually hit the hotel. I forget which country that was, at Bahrain, where those servicemen were in. They hit the hotel, and
yeah, I've seen a few.
It was Dubai. It was Dubai or it was Bahrain. I forget. Unfortunately, those reservists were killed. But for the most part, very few casualties because they evacuated the bases. The problem is that's the infrastructure, the radars, the early warning system, all this many decades of infrastructure that we built up and might not be able to replace if it's destroyed. I mean, how many radars right now, how many Fed radars can we build a year right now with the way the economy is? I don't know.
Yeah, without access to rare earths.
Yeah, access to rare earths and just the industrial output. It's a question if it it's not even a question of how long would it take to replace that stuff that's Iran is destroying, but well, can we replace it? It's a very tough question, and
why wouldn't Iran just destroy it again after we replace
right.
it?
So I mean, and now I remember you were very certain that Trump was going to attack Iran, and I was less certain. And I was telling you, well, he might. I was disagreeing with you that it was a certainty, and the reason why was because it was like, well, there's probably 50, 60, 70% chance Trump will attack. And the reason why I doubt is because he says you can't topple Iran without boots on the ground, and there was no buildup of the forces to even think about that, to build it, and there still isn't. They've already fired the first shots. We've had the first round, and they can't do boots on the ground because they don't have the boots to put on the ground. They didn't even start assembling. Guys, if you look at the description for this video, you will see a link to the article I put about the boots on the ground, and I'll just give the succinct version. It was about 5 months of preparation in 1991 for Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and 2003, also about 5 months. First time it was almost 1 million troops, including everybody, support personnel, all that, and it was more than USA by itself could deploy. The reason it was so many is because we had Egypt, we had Saudi Arabia, we had Britain, we had France. Had a true coalition for Desert Storm. 2003, you could already see, just 12 years later, the combat's power they could put in one place was degraded a lot. And also the international clout the USA had was a lot lower because we only basically had Britain and I think a token force of like 200 Poles, just to show that Poland supports us with their 200 guys. So no serious coalition to speak of. People pretty adamantly opposed. In fact, most of the USA's usual allies actually adamantly, even the same allies who supported invading Afghanistan, were adamantly against Iraq. So it both showed weakness and also, I think, hurt USA's reputation even more because, France in particular, because because Iraq they had the food for oil program. It was actually a major trading partner. So it was actually it was a French foothold in the Middle East, this good relationship they had with Iraq, which was under sanctions. And then Bush just said, well, you know what, I'm just going to stomp all over it. And France wasn't happy. They got, of course, humiliated in the press. We say, the cheese-eating surrender monkeys said we changed the name of French fries. We're not going to eat French fries anymore. We're going to eat freedom fries. This huge smear campaign against France because, and I never knew. I went my whole life until I think a year ago. I didn't even know the geopolitical reasons France opposed it. Because the media portrayed, because they're cowardly, they want to surrender, blah, 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 all this nonsense. And the actual reasons that were political and economic. It was completely reasonable for France to be upset that the USA just got barreled in and displaced.
Messed up their great access to energy, to cheap energy.
Yes. Completely displaced French, both their economic link and also their political control of the Middle East, because France and Britain have historically shared, that region, and Iraq was up, post quote unquote post colonial France had that foothold, and now it's gone. Now we have today. So as just said, I couldn't really even say much about the troops Trump could send. I don't know if there's even a clear answer for how many he could send, because there's been no buildup. There's no preparation. There's just the soldiers and airmen and so on who are usually there anyway, and 2 carrier groups. Both of those previous wars had 6 carrier groups, and Trump wants to send a third one. A little belatedly send a third one. It doesn't. I don't see any planning. I didn't see any. It's just it's like, okay, you've already gone past the latest points that you had planned this to. You're like, you had a plan A and then like a plan. I wouldn't even call it a plan B. Like a plan A point two. Like I don't even know what to call it. It's just like then they were kind of scraping, maybe the Kurds will attack, maybe we can get, internal dissent or, something. They're really grasping at straws, which doesn't sound like someone who had a plan going into it.
Yeah. Which, I mean, the logic of what you're describing, if we carry that out, it kind of reinforces an idea that, the U.S. is willing to burn it all down if they can't rule over it. So, I mean, there's this kind of thinking that, the West understands that the current configuration, the current, global system that they've really been the most influential in putting in place since 1945 is no longer, working in their interest. And so, they need to burn it down, overthrow the game board, turn over the game board, wreck all the pieces, and then create a new system, a new game that benefits themselves. And they're not really too concerned about the things that liberals, good religious liberals, are thinking about that they would normally be concerned with. So it's interesting because I'm just not certain that the West isn't, things aren't going completely as they want them to in the Middle East with Iran. So obviously they would prefer to, regime change Iran, control the oil. But I'm sure that they understood that there was not a big chance of that happening. And there's just a better chance of, by using and sacrificing their proxies, the Gulf monarchies and Israel, that they'll just be able to wreck the region and probably turn that region into a non-oil producing region, at least in the short to medium term. And I think they're fine with that because that does weaken China, right? Because China doesn't have the domestic energy capacity that the United States does. So, in this big grand chessboard thinking, just wrecking the oil production capability of the Middle East, West Asia, they're not hurting themselves. The United States is not hurting themselves, but they are hurting those countries that, are reliant upon, oil. And they're not done, right? Like this is just the beginning of wrecking the game board. And they have, proxies and assets in place in other parts of the world that they're going to do the same thing to. But who knows? I mean, that's one perspective. Another perspective is that they really miscalculated and they really thought there was a good chance to win in Iran. And they didn't really, like you're saying, they didn't really think about the aftermath. And now they're struggling to figure out what they're going to do in this situation. But I expect that they're just going to continue to escalate and draw this out. It's going to hurt the global economy. And of course, like those of us that predicted war with Iran have been predicting it's going to lead to a global economic catastrophe. And then we've also been predicting, that's the point. That is the fucking point. They want a global economic catastrophe. So, we'll watch and see how things play out. But, the idea that you were going to attack Iran and win, especially with just air power, I don't think anybody thought that was going to happen. So again, we got to think about what is actually going on, what the West's actual, objectives are globally speaking, and how does what's going on in Iran, how does what's going on in Russia and Ukraine, how does that, fit in? So, and that gets us to, the title of our program is,
I want to push back.
Go ahead.
I want to push back a little bit because I do think they did believe the air power would be enough. And even when I posted that article, saying we would have to put boots in the ground, I even had military and former military people saying, no, we're winning, air power will be enough. So, I mean, it just seems like almost every, Western person, USA aligned person does sincerely believe that. most of the European liberals that blocked me or stopped talking to me about it, I'm sure if we asked them, they would say the same thing. Oh, U.S. supremacy. You could, five. I mean, five F-35s could destroy China and Russia combined. Because they're super planes. You achieve air superiority, and then nothing else matters. That's this sincerely held belief, and I've it's so prevalent. I just don't believe they didn't actually believe that when they went into this. And the other issue I push back on is like, yeah, I mean, if they environmentally wreck the Middle East, so there's oil spill, it's just a disaster zone like Kuwait, 1991 on steroids. If that's just the whole region, like how Saddam set fire to the oil wells, it's just across the region. Yeah, that of course would be a disaster. But if the USA goes to war against Iran and loses, which, barring either a successful ground invasion or nuclear weapons, it does at this point look like it's not a certainty, but it does, because we can't know exactly what's going on in the Iranian side, but it does look like it could actually be a loss. And the USA is really dependent on this reputation of invincibility, right? That no one can go toe to toe with the USA and win. Even the insurgencies were like, because those weren't exactly. I mean, they just weren't battlefield defeats. It was the USA saying, "Well, we're tired of occupying this place. We're going to leave." But this would be different. This would be an actual battlefield defeat.
Let me respond. Two things. So, what is a defeat? Again, if the point is, a geopolitical objective where China is the main target, and you end up eliminating oil production from the Middle East, which by extension will eliminate China from being able to access Middle East oil. So if that's the objective, they haven't lost that. I mean, again, because things could continue to the point where all of the oil exports are destroyed, and there's no capacity for the Middle East to export oil. So if that's the objective, that is an achievable objective. Like, that's something that the United States can do. Your second point, shoot. I can't keep two things in mind.
The USA losing so much face from going against a much smaller country and not winning.
Okay, so your second point was about, like, perception and the need for the United States to have credibility. And what we're seeing more and more of is that the United States is trying to get the world away from idealism and dealing with strict power principles, straight power principles. So what people think of the United States is obviously less important to whoever is controlling the strategy and the behavior and the things that the West is doing. It is obvious that, as far as their priorities go, being thought of as credible, even a credible threat, might not be as important as this, as shaping the global battlefield in strict, power terms, and a real politic where it's not about perception, it's about reality. And so if the reality is, China is cut off from oil, and the whole world becomes dependent on energy that the United States controls, well, they're willing to, they don't care. They don't care if you like us. They don't care what you think. You need us, and you better side with us, because if you don't, you'll be destroyed, just like we're destroying everything else. So I don't know. It's interesting to contemplate, and we're at the very beginning, right? We're 9-10 days in to this huge escalation. We're, if you want to count the beginning of World War III, with the Ukrainian coup in 2014, I think that's a pretty good place. I mean, who knows? Like, I mean, again, you could. Some people say, we're in the First World War. We're in the third phase of the First World War that started in, 1914 or whenever World War I kicked off. But there's all kinds of ways to analyze and conceive of what is going on. But you know, there's definitely a shift in the global order, and the United States is driving that shift. And I think it's obvious because the old order that they created was no longer useful for them, and so they are going to extraordinary lengths to create a new order. And you know, and I think that new order is just kind of destruction. They're happy to destroy, you know, what they've created, and then they're going to work with something new. And in the meantime, you know, there are two oceans, and they're incredible, you know, domestic energy production capacity, as well as, you know, being able to control North America, South America, is what they're going to be relying on as they you know, change the system and try and create a new one. But central to all of that is definitely the Russia-China issue, and then Trump. He's talking about, you know, lowering removing sanctions against Russian energy. He's talking about you know, just continuing to have this good relationship with Russia. Russia's going to be benefiting from increased prices for oil, obviously, because we've seen they've almost doubled. You know, the price of a barrel of oil has almost doubled, you know, since this started. And so, you know, again, he's trying to figure out a way where he can, you know, peel Russia away from China, and you know, and he's hoping that he can have success with that. But I don't know. So I mean, do we want to just assess directly this ideological question about, is what's going on a class struggle, or is it a national struggle? I mean, or do you have, you know, other things you would like to say about what I said, or about anything?
Well, maybe it's just, I think it's just a very important starting point for the ideological discussion, because I mean the issues the USA, you know, when you're in a hole, the first step is to step dig. I mean, the USA right now has hegemony, right? It's not as strong as it was 4 years ago or 5 years ago, but it has hegemony. It has the world's reserve currency, the petrodollar. It's still, you know, when it comes to the financial system, it is still largely a unipolar world. And the things that make it less unipolar than it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago are things the USA itself did. Because if it had, because, you know, it was the failed war with Russia that so far failed that, you know, took that portion of the world economy out of, you know, de-dollarized that portion of the economy. It's all this, it's this ongoing feud with China that has caused them to reduce their dollar holdings. Right, so it's like, so yes, the world's de-dollarizing, but you can attribute that to things the USA did. It's not, you know, a foreign, an external adversary nefariously de-dollarizing. It's the USA itself pushing de-dollarization. It's like self-destruction. So it's like, okay, so maybe that is a good starting point for the ideological discussion, because it's like, well, okay, if I was a capitalist, if I was an American capitalist, I wanted to keep ruling well, why destroy the system that's working for you? Because it is working for the USA. And I don't think there's really even any major country in the world that's actually opposed to that system. I mean, they'll give lip service to it. They'll say, oh, multipolarity, BRICS, blah, blah, blah. But I don't think China and Russia and, you know, everyone else has shown no sign that they're against. I mean, if the USA was just not hostile to them, they would all be fine with the dollar being the basis of the global economy. So I guess my main question is, why screw that up? Because it is working for the USA, and the things that make it not work are caused by the USA itself. So it's like, what is the end state they want?
And that's a disagreement, right? Because that's your perception, right? You perceive what you just said to be true, and I would question that. I would say that, you know, the Western oligarchy saw Russia integrating with Europe as a huge threat to Western hegemony, and especially the Western hegemony, headquartered in the United States. Similarly, they did see China working to negotiate, energy deals in the currencies of individual governments. So for a long time, the writing has been on the wall, and I think that the Western strategists have been seeing that, their hegemony is slipping out of their hands, with the integration of the Eurasia, right? With Russia getting along great with Europe, Europe benefiting tremendously, Russia benefiting tremendously, China just becoming the world's manufacturer, the top trading partner of 120 countries. It's probably more than that now. So all these things were the death knell for, the United States led global order and Western imperialism. And it was empowering countries they didn't control, namely Russia and China, right? And so the question then becomes, well, how do you address that issue? And so we saw what they did. They sabotaged the pipeline. They sabotaged economic integration between Europe and Russia, and now they're going after the lowest hanging fruit, which is Iran, which is, the weakest of the major countries that resist, that demand sovereignty. So, I mean, it's two different perspectives, but I mean, we just have a fundamental disagreement. Like, you're certain that everything was going great for Western hegemony, and it was the U.S. that, was the one that started declining their own hegemony. And I don't think that's true, right? I think that the U.S. didn't perceive it like that, that they saw their hegemony was inevitably going to decline if they didn't do something. And then time was not on their side, and they had to act fast. And I think Trump winning in 2016 was a surprise, and it might have delayed a lot of this stuff, because I think Hillary might have pushed that war with, between Russia and Ukraine to happen a lot earlier than it did. But who knows? That's kind of speculation.
I do agree with most of your individual points. Like, I mean, Hillary, I remember the day I decided to not vote for Hillary Clinton. I was actually in Kuwait at the time, and it was when she was saying that we needed to establish a no-fly zone over Syria, which is, and I hate that term because it's like, oh, it's a no-fly zone. That means you're going to shoot down. I mean, they use that term in Serbia.
You're going to give air cover to ISIS.
Yeah. You're going to shoot down. You're going to shoot down Russian planes. Well, that's the same thing. That's the same thing as going to war with Russia. When you say, oh, we should shoot down Russian planes, it's the same thing. So she was openly campaigning on the idea of going to war with Russia back in 2016. So I think not going to war with Russia in 2016 was a great thing. So whatever else Trump did or said, that's one thing we can say was good about Trump winning in 2016. I also agree with you about Europe and Russia forming a pan-European union, partnership, or even just literally, combining the European Union and Russia was considered a huge threat to American capital, American business. And it was so funny because I was saying this 5 years ago. I was saying this in 2021. It's like they view, and like European federalists, European liberals wouldn't believe in it. Oh no, that's a Kremlin talking point. And I could see this kind of sinking into their heads in the last few months when Trump was talking about annexing Greenland. They were sinking. But then they were blaming Trump. It's so interesting. It's like Trump is like the straw man that they take their anger out on. What's that festival where you have the straw man and you set it on fire? It's like Midsummer. Yes, it's like you have this bogeyman that you blame all of your problems on. It's like Trump's that bogeyman because, I'd ask him, well, I told you this 4 or 5 years ago. You didn't believe me. Now it's happening. He's like, well, it's not the USA. It's because Trump's like this rogue Hitler type figure. As soon as Trump is gone, the USA will be back to being our buddies. And it's like these people are hopeless. My question is, how is that? I mean, is that because the title of the show is this a class struggle or a national struggle? Isn't that more of a national struggle when you're saying I don't want Europe and Russia to combine resources? Well, isn't that kind of I mean, why would a person who's just motivated by capital be upset about it, as opposed to a nationalist who says, I don't want that part of the world to be stronger than the USA? Why would the capitalists think that?
Well, I mean, which framework to use, right? Are we going to go with the framework that says every country is independent and sovereign, and it pursues its own best interest in an anarchic, chaotic environment, that has no higher authority to enforce laws and international rules? So, if we're going with that framework, nothing makes sense. If we're going with that framework, we can't understand how Europe willfully allowed the United States to sever their economic relationship that was very beneficial to them with Russia. The only way to understand that is to realize that the Western Europe acquiesced to the United States, that Western European leaders agree with the United States. Why do they agree with the United States? Because they're part of the same global class. They form the same global empire, and they have the same antipathy towards other sovereign states, that they don't want to have power over them on the planet, right? So they're throwing their lot in with their fellow class, their class oligarchs, and they're trusting that it's going to be the United States that'll lead them into a golden era where they dominate the planet, full spectrum dominance. And so it's not nationalism that can explain that. It's class. Like, nationalism simply can't explain why Europe is doing what it does, right? Why little Israel is, attacking this huge country next to them. Why the Gulf monarchies are being a part of it, because they're being used as proxies. Why Ukraine is being a proxy. That's not in their national interest to do that. So all of this is being driven by class and by the reality of a class-based Western empire that exists to serve. I'm yelling now because the louder I get, the more correct I am.
Yes.
It's but the Western empire exists to serve the interests of the oligarchs. It does not exist to serve the interests of humanity, of any individual nation, or the working class at all. It exists to benefit the transnational oligarchy that created it, and that's who it serves. And so that is the explanation for what the fuck is going on. So it's like, this is what really invigorates me, right? To tell fucking liberals how dumb they are and how they can't fucking understand anything because they're using a wrong framework, And again, so it's just, reality is proving that Marxism is the proper way to understand things. Reality has a Marxist bias without incorporating the idea of class and oppositional class interests, that results exactly from capitalism. The capitalist mode of production is what creates these class conflicts. And we're seeing this play out, and it's the only fucking explanation. And of course, it's the correct explanation, and it's explaining why things happen, and it's going to predict what's going to happen in the future. And so the question is the oligarchy ever going to, give up on its grand global ambition of, deteriorating, the sovereignty of China, the sovereignty of Russia, the sovereignty of Iran, and pacify them and make the world safe, for the oligarchs, for the ruling elite to do as they please. And so, that's what's playing out. And I don't have the answer to that, but I understand the dynamics that are forcing this conflict. And it's not China forcing this conflict. It's not Russia. It's not Iran. It is the West. And the West is doing it because they feel that if they don't, they will lose. And so, they see that clearly. And that is what's happening. And that's why all this stuff is going on. It's a paradigm shift. It's the overthrowing of the game board. It's going to burn it down if we can't control it. Like, this is the mentality, of the Western oligarchy and what they're doing. So I don't know. Can you defend nationalism? Can you defend the liberal nationalist framework and try and make sense of what's going on just using nationalism and not talking about class?
Well, it's it's tough to defend because I'd say 90% agree with you, and that there is definitely a transnational class, and you can look for why these European leaders are acting the way they are. If you look at them, I mean, you can answer these questions on Wikipedia, literally, almost literally. You have to kind of dig, but if you look at these people individually, like Macron. there was a scandal in I want to say 2013, 2014, when a French businessman went to the USA, and he was I guess some sort. It was some. I'm not quite sure how their system works, but it was some sort of state co-owned company that in their energy system. There's this general at the time. General Electric was trying to buy them out and buy a large portion of France's energy, which of course would hurt their sovereignty because it's literally a foreign entity owning your infrastructure. It does hurt your sovereignty. So there was pushback. So this guy, this senior person in their energy, came over and was arrested on fraud, basically trumped up charges, and they held him in prison. And the energy minister resigned, and guess who replaced him as the new energy minister? Macron. Macron replaced him, and he accepted the deal. So General Electric bought a huge portion of France's energy production. When he was, again, I think he was the economy minister. I forget what position he was at the time, but there was another scandal when Uber wanted to enter the French economy, and of course ignored France's very strict labor code, very union-friendly, very strict labor code, and it applies to taxis. Uber wanted to ignore all that, and they literally bribed Macron to let them come in and come up this BS, or a ride-sharing company, and so they could ignore the normal labor code, which of course hurts the local companies who did have to follow that law, and so Uber just kind of sneaked in. And there's others, like what's that woman's name? President Moldova. I'm drawing a blank on her name.
Moldova. Shoot, I am too.
I'm drawing a total blank. I'm sorry. I'm trying to draw a total blank on it, but yeah, nobody can remember what her name is. She's who repeatedly says Moldova should be annexed into Romania. And that's a soft.
Maya Sandu.
Sandu. Thank you, Sandu. Yes. And that's marketed to Moldovans as they actually made Romanian an official language of Moldova, and they're marketing it as a soft way to. It's like a backdoor to the European Union because the Moldova doesn't really meet their entrance requirements. But if Romania, which is in the European Union, does the soft annexation of Moldova, then that gets them into the European Union. And she's a Romanian citizen. I think she's been to America, so she's very much a very foreign person who's allegedly the president, this allegedly sovereign country of Moldova.
A few seemingly disconnected anecdotes to illustrate what point specifically.
Well, these guys are part of, like you're saying, they are part of a transnational system. They're not loyal to these individual countries. They're working for this. Yeah. So that's
that's a tremendously important point that needs to be shouted into the ears of every fucking American, is that this government does not give a fuck about America. They're using America just like they're using any state. This is a transnational oligarchy, and they're using states as weapons to further their transnational oligarchic interests, which have no loyalty at all to any fucking states or any people, much less any working class that, comprise the majority of every nation. So Americans just need to get that, but they're deluded with this fucking liberal patriotic nonsense that, it's America, for whatever America does is good. But and this is how insidious liberalism is, right? This is the problem with indoctrinating everybody into this religion, because it keeps them totally disconnected from actual reality. And then and what happens is they start supporting those things that are absolutely against their interests. If you care about America, if it's in your interest to have a great American country, you don't want to do what the oligarchy is doing, right? It's not in the interest of the working class to to be a global empire, to invest in, foreign military bases in over 75% of the world's countries, being at constant war, doing this attack against Iran, which is going to cause what? Oil prices to double. Is that good for you? Is there a draft? We're talking about draft. Your great article, everybody go read Ian's article at Reading Junkie, talks about, the viability of a ground invasion of Iran, because how else are they going to pacify that country? Well, they might have to do a draft. The point is, people need to start thinking realistically and let go of their liberal idealism, that all it does is it disconnects them from reality and makes it impossible to understand what is going on. You have to use an alternative framework. And I know liberals have been indoctrinated to think Marx is evil and wrong. And it's just, we got to just keep that out of our minds. But the reality is that it's a Marxist understanding is the only, it's the best way to understand what's going on, because, it has to do at its base with the fundamental reality of the capitalist mode of production, and how the capitalist mode of production necessarily divides people along class lines where their political and economic interests are in opposition. So every nation that maintains the capitalist mode of production has not a single national interest. They'll have two national interests: the national interest of the ownership class and the national interest of the working class. And there's a struggle between the two classes to control the state and control the policies of that state. And of course, in the United States, we have always and only been a dictatorship of the ownership class. And we're seeing that very clearly. Everything Marx said is vindicated in real time. Everything that, Stalin and Lenin has said was true is being vindicated even more clearly in real time as we speak. And we see, that liberalism is just an ideological construct designed to obfuscate and conceal and hide the reality of, class tyranny and class dictatorship. So the working class have no say. We don't have no say. We can't vote out empire. We can't vote out oligarchs. The oligarchs didn't create an electoral system so we can use it to vote them out of power. That is just not how the fuck it works. And, people need to wake up. It's really something. It's really something what this liberalism has done to people's minds.
I want to bring up this comment. Well, we have a couple of comments we should probably address. The first one I bring up actually is Jace Hart saying they're fine with America falling, becoming third world. They can use us as cheap labor to keep capitalism going. I do think that's true. I think if we're going to talk about, if we're going to talk about the transnational elite, I think ultimately they don't. I think that's actually true. They don't care if the U.S. nation state balkanizes. I think it's it's kind of, it's hard to wrap my mind around, but I do think it's true. If they think this won't hurt, our bottom line, they're fine with the USA collapsing. If they can, maybe they think they can find a different country to use as an imperial core, or they just think, well, we have AI and ChatGPT and all this other and Elon Musk's spaceships. We don't need a power base anymore, where we can be decentralized. Whatever they're thinking in their brains. I do think it's true, because these policies are going to, reduce the USA. I think, within the next 10 years, we'll reduce it from the status of a developed country to an underdeveloped country. It's going to be a very...
Can I speak to that real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to make, so I'm going to speak to that, but I want to preface it by making the point that, fundamentally we have two different approaches. We have the approach of the Western oligarchy. All they care about is hegemony and power and control, and they're willing to destroy to maintain it, right? They're willing to burn everything down to maintain it. What is the opposition to that? The opposition to that is progress, developing humanity, peace through mutual prosperity. Like, these are the two forces that are colliding. On the one hand, you have the Western imperialism that is only concerned about its own hegemony, and they're willing to wreck things to maintain it and to attain it. In opposition to that is the idea that we should progress humanity, we should develop, we should have prosperity and peace through, win-win trade and development and mutual prosperity. So these are the two forces at war. These are the two forces that are being fought. Now, the transnational oligarchy uses states as weapons to further their own interests. And right now, they don't really have any other place to go. And so that's why I think, it might be the United States that is the last place that they're going to destroy, right? Like this is their best weapon. This is their strongest tool. The United States, with their economy and their military, is their greatest asset of the transnational oligarchy. But again, what is their purpose? Their purpose is to use the United States to further their hegemony. And in that process, they will ask the people of the United States to suffer. They're not going to think twice. I doubt that they're going to destroy that tool and wreck that tool, until the very end, right? Until the very end, it'll be their last piece that falls is possible. But they don't have any place to go. Like realistically, if they think they can go to China, and just move to China, like that's not going to happen. And I don't think it's going to happen with Russia. So, they don't have any refuge. This is their greatest asset, their greatest tool, their most powerful weapon, and they're going to use it. But by using this tool means that they're going to expect the people of this country to sacrifice in furtherance of their transnational oligarch interests. And the whole time they're asking us to suffer, they're going to be telling us it's for us. It's for nationalism. It's because the USA, because all these other threats are a threat to us. They're just going to, while they're pursuing their own interests, they're going to have their propaganda apparatus telling everybody, no, we're pursuing your interests. And so too many people are so stupid that they're going to believe that too. So anyway, did I address what I was saying I was going to address? I kind of did.
I think you did. I do think, though, they see the USA and the U.S., the American nation, if you will, as an expendable resource. Because at the beginning I was saying, well, from the logic of someone who sees it as an asset that should be, protected and fortified, they're kind of doing it like your house, your home that you live in, you build it, you improve it, you make it better. They're treating it as an expendable asset that you use until it breaks, and then you throw it away like a hammer, or even like your car. You drive your car until it breaks to the point you can't fix it, and you get a new car. Or your refrigerator. You use your refrigerator until it's broken, and you throw it away. They're using it like that.
Well, they're using Ukraine like that. They're using the Gulf monarchies like that.
And
I don't put it past. Good.
Well, I was going to say, I think most, like you ask most Americans, well, maybe not most Americans, but it's easier to get them to accept that Ukraine, Kurds, or whoever the favorite ethnic group of the moment is an expendable asset. It's very hard to get them to swallow that the USA itself, Americans themselves, are like that. I mean, just think of, I use that time frame of the wars with Iraq. I think it's absolutely just correct to say the USA's peak was 1991, because the Soviet Union was dissolving. China was not the industrialized world power it is now. It was the USA that was just at its absolute, its peak, because we had all this military industry from the Cold War. It was a very powerful and unified nation. Now, and this is for the people in the comments too, what is better in the USA now than in 1991? Like, can we name one thing that's better now than in 1991? Because to me, it seems like literally everything is worse than it was, in my childhood. So I don't look at these guys. I don't look at the elites. I don't look at the Elon Musks and Bill Gates and Warren Buffetts of the world and say, oh, these people are improving, at least maybe with, the Gilded Age guys. They're just awful, terrible people who don't care about their workers. But you could say, okay, at the end of the Industrial Revolution, I can see things were better than at the beginning of the industrial revolution. But now it's just like, what is better? What is better now? 30 years ago. That's not even a rhetorical question. What has this system actually improved in our lives?
Yeah, and so if I consider that question through the lens of our title, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we understand that, with the advent of socialism and actual existing socialism, there was an ideological struggle, right? And capitalism was forced to compete ideologically with socialism. And capitalism argued that socialism is awful. There's no freedom. It's terrible. And the West is about capitalism. Capitalism is synonymous with freedom. Capitalism is good. Workers should want capitalism because socialism will end in, gulags, starvation, death squads, blah, blah, blah. And because of this ideological struggle, the ruling class really invested in winning that struggle. And guess what? They really did a lot of socialist kind of things by creating a maximum wage that lasted through the 60s, where your top marginal tax rate was like 96%. And you had what was considered the golden age of capitalism, which was like the 50s and early 60s, where, one family could have one breadwinner, the stay-at-home mom. You could afford all your education, all of your, if you were white, all of your, health care, and then you'd have a pension, and that was considered the golden age of capitalism. But definitely at 91, when the West no longer saw themselves in an ideological struggle, when they had won the ideological struggle, when everybody was convinced that socialism is evil and capitalism is good, that's when they realized we don't have to keep pretending. We don't have to invest in a competition and try and benefit workers. Where are they going to go? There's no competition. Well, this is it. And so you saw things. And so since 1970, actually, pretty much everything is flatlined. If you look at worker wages, like they've gone up, but the cost of living, the cost of education, healthcare, housing, transportation has gone up even more than wages have gone up. And so, so yeah, I mean, you talk about 1991, and I would agree that, things haven't improved. And I would argue that things haven't improved since the 70s. And it reveals, this is revealing, right? Because it reveals that the capitalist system, where the capitalist elite are the ruling, are comprised the ruling class, and the capitalist elite dictate economic policy, foreign policy. Like, this is a bad thing, and it's not in the benefit of workers, right? So, this gets us back to Marx, the reality of oppositional class interest within every given nation that engages in capitalism and that utilizes the capitalist mode of production necessarily divides that society on competing economic and political interests between the wealthy elites and the majority of working class people. And so it is totally unsurprising that, for a couple decades, we had the golden age of capitalism, and they were really invested, utilizing things like economic controls and maximum wage and allowing unions. Like, all that thing was very beneficial for the working class, and the working class thrived, even better than the destroyed, ruined socialist societies that we put under siege, in the Soviet Union and China. So, but now we see that socialism in China has actually been tremendously successful, unprecedentedly successful. That word has meaning, unprecedented. We have never, ever seen the skyrocketing of quality of life, access to opportunity, improved living standards that we've seen in China. We have never seen on that scale and on that kind of skyrocketing trajectory. Where's my hand? Straight up. It's just been incredible. That's what socialism has done. Meanwhile, capitalism in the United States, stagnation, perpetual war. We just engaged in a genocide in Gaza. We're doing another genocide. In the 70s, we did a genocide in Indonesia. We did genocides in Latin America, with the narco death squads that we had overthrowing socialist governments there. So, the reality ought to be crystal clear for people. It ought to be stark, about what's going on and the two sides and which side ought the vast majority of humanity, be on. And it's only this propaganda apparatus that, indoctrinates everybody into this religion of liberalism that really detaches their minds from reality. That is the reason why people are so fucking confused.
I think you're right. And I think, like, even if you go as far back as Nazi Germany, you look at their social programs that were mimicking Soviet programs, in part to show themselves as an alternative to the Soviet Union, a shield against the Soviet Union, if you will, if the defenders of Europe, and also just to undermine German communism, which was very popular. And so showing that capitalism, that National Socialism, as they called it, is the way, and it gives the workers all these good things. You don't need communism. You don't need all that Bolshevik nonsense.
Judeo-Bolshevik.
Yes, Judeo-Bolshevik nonsense. And I think that is basically what happened after in the late Cold War in the 1990s. It's just like we didn't need to compete with that anymore, so they stopped even pretending to care about improving things for making your life better. When they just, why would I make your life better? I can make it worse for me. And it's hard for me to it's hard for me to understand, what makes these people's minds. I remember a couple of years ago, I wrote a blog post talking about, we have this system of artificial poverty, because we are basically, I think, you could make the argument the Soviet Union wasn't wrong just too early. It wasn't, the only trading partners of the time that were very helpful were North America or, Western and Central Europe. So if those countries sanction you, there's not many people left to trade with, because pretty much everybody else at the time was still living in straw huts. There's only so much you can trade with them. Now the global economy, even people living who used to be 50 years ago living in straw huts are now living in skyscrapers. That's happening on every continent, everywhere. It's kind of remarkable. Even countries that are on the very poor end of the scale, like Indonesia and Vietnam, some of these countries are made communist. By the way, we tend to forget that Cambodia and Vietnam are still overtly communist, and they're
Laos.
Yes, Laos. But we're seeing this, the globe. It's really this and I think that's, the connection to the world economy matters more than whether a system is capitalist or communist. Russia's capitalist. I wouldn't say, I don't look at the Russian system saying, Russian capitalism is bad. I wouldn't say it's better than the Soviet Union, but it is more connected to the world's economy. You can't just cut off Russia from the world like you could the Soviet Union.
Can I speak to that for a sec?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because it's important. It's just so crazy. Liberals, like American liberals who are anti-communist, they are very quick to, for instance, blame an ideology for the fact that North Korea, is not as prosperous as South Korea, right? They want to blame an ideology, or they blame an ideology for Cuba's lack of development. But the ideological factor is really has zero to do with it, other than it's the ideology that makes, Western imperialism, attack those countries economically with sanctions and an embargo. So the sanctions and the embargo are the actual reasons for the lack of development. And again, we can see what happened to China when the sanctions and the embargo was lifted. China just skyrocketed. And of course, the same would be true of North Korea and Cuba. And the West knows that. And that's why they're implementing this embargo and, maintaining the sanctions. But imagine thinking, like, what kind of a fucking idiot is going to think that, it's communism and it's not the 70-year-long trade embargo that not only applies to the US, but applies to every country in the world. any country that trades with North Korea or Cuba is going to be sanctioned. Any bank that does transactions on behalf of the Cuban government will be sued in a court of law, and the weight of the United States political system will come down on it. So it's just so silly that liberals are quick to look at the poverty that exists in Cuba, and then they don't do the same to Haiti, right? They don't look at Haiti and say, well, it's capitalism. Haiti hasn't been embargoed. They're a lot worse off than Cuba, but they're not saying, well, it's because ideology. No, they're never going.
Not to cut you off. I love giving that question to liberals when they go up, because they always, what you just said, I think is very important, because they compare the USA to Cuba. It's like, okay, you're taking one of the largest and most populous countries in the world, comparing it to an island. You need to, if you want to fairly compare an island, you need to compare it to another island. So I asked him, if you had a choice, you had to pick one or the other. Would you live in Haiti or would you live in Cuba? And you just see their brains just, their wheels spinning, because of course no one wants to live in Haiti. But they don't want to say that, because Cuba is supposed to be like hell on earth because it's communist, and you'd think, well, logically, Haiti is capitalist. It should be better than Cuba. It's not even sanctioned, right? They don't want to say that.
But yeah, no, and in their deluded minds, they have defined capitalism in such a way that it's never really even ever existed, and that's how they can vindicate the term capitalism. And they have this whole worldview, this whole ideological understanding that is designed solely to vindicate capitalism and has no interest at all in understanding reality. And this is the discussions that I have repeatedly with liberals, the definitions, their worldview, their arguments, because what they're going to say, what they're going to argue is that Haiti's not capitalist either. It's certainly not communist.
Not real capitalism, right?
Yeah, not real capitalism, exactly. Oh, because it's not real capitalism because there's corruption, so they have this whole self-reinforcing circular kind of reasoning framework, but it has no interest in understanding reality as it actually exists. It's primarily concerned with vindicating certain concepts in a way that are not going to be blamed for bad things. So capitalism isn't to blame for everything. Wherever things are bad, it's because of lack of capitalism. And that's it. Anyway. I wanted to make the point. You said something great, and it made me think of when people do bad comparisons. So the best, most useful comparisons is not China to the United States, because China, because people will say, look at GDP per capita. The United States has 5 times the GDP per capita that China has. So fine, we win that comparison. And I'm like, okay, well, that's not the best metric for any number of reasons, but it's also not fair to do a straight comparison between the US and China, even though when you do that, China still comes off looking very good. But a more accurate comparison is going to be China-India. Both of them got their independence at the same time. Both of them have roughly the same landmass, roughly the same population. And China has, by a factor of 6, circled India as far as GDP. Their growth has lapped India 6 times. It's like, so that's a definite proof. And same with Cuba. Comparing Cuba to the United States is dumb. A much better comparison is Cuba with Haiti, with Hispaniola, or the Dominican Republic, which is the other side of Hispaniola. So the thing is, World War II was won by the communists in the Soviet Union and the communists in China. The communist Chinese beat the Japanese. The communist Soviets beat the Germans. Those were the 2 main adversaries. The U.S. did very little fighting, lost very many people, whereas the Soviet Union was entirely invaded and destroyed, and China was entirely invaded, occupied, and destroyed. And so coming out of World War II, the United States was the world manufacturer. Their manufacturing base was firing on all 6 cylinders. They accounted for half the global economy. The United States accounted for half the global economy following World War II, and only 5% of the population. Meanwhile, Soviet Union was really destroyed, had to rebuild. 30 million people died in the Soviet Union, right? 20 million people died in China, totally destroyed. No literacy, drug abuse was rampant. prostitution, landlordism. Like China was a fucking basket case, and the Soviet Union was really defeated. In comparison to the United States, fucking half the global economy wasn't touched from shore to shore, untouched by the war, in a perfect place, thanks to the sacrifice of the communists. And within less than a century, the United States has totally squandered, all of that benefit they had, and they really have misused like that huge discrepancy of wealth that they accounted for, entirely misused on creating a global empire, trying to attain full spectrum dominance, trying to attain global hegemony. For who? For you and me, Ian? Fuck no. Fuck no. It was for the fucking transnational oligarch elite who wanted to pacify the world, destroy a people's movement, destroy ideologies that are predicated on furthering humanity, on progressing humanity, so that they could, rule the globe unmolested, undeterred, and unrivaled. Really, they want to be unrivaled, and that is what we're seeing play out today. They're going after sovereign states who are refusing to bend the knee. Sovereign, and they see them as rivals, right? China's a rival to Western imperialism. So China's the main target, Russia's the main target, and Iran's the main target. And we could see 2 proxy wars already: a proxy war against Russia, proxy war against Iran. They're both going.
I don't know if it's a proxy war anymore. It's just a war with Iran.
Yeah.
It's actual direct war now. I do want, just to finish what your point, or even more succinct way to say it, when they compare free market, laissez-faire capitalism, if you will, with communism or some flavor of socialism, what they always do is they pick the most remote village in Russia or China, and say this is what everybody lives like under communism. Then they take the nicest, most affluent suburb in America, in the continental United States, and say this is what everybody lives like under capitalism. What they don't do, they don't go to a village in southern Italy or Puerto Rico, God help them. Those would probably, places that would actually are closer to the mean, average of what a person is actually living like in a capitalist economy. But they don't want to show that because you look at Puerto Rico or southern Italy or one of these places, like, well, that kind of sucks. It's not actually better than the examples you were showing me under communism. They want to show those green AstroTurf lawns with the squeaky clean pavement and the cookie cutter yard and fence. That's the image they want to show of capitalism.
I've seen a meme that shows Detroit, and it says, "This is Cuba under communism." Oh, just kidding, it's Detroit.
Yes.
So
there's a libertarian page that said, I think, shared that meme, didn't realize it was a joke. They said this is communism in Cuba, and this is capitalism. Then someone said in the comments, well, actually, the images are reversed. The good picture is Cuba, and the bad picture is America, Detroit. But yeah, where do we want to take it from here? Do you want to address anything? I mean, we had some other comments here. Did any follow-up you wanted to do here with any of these?
No, I had one thought that has just ran out of my mind. Okay, it was the average. So one of the things that they do with these comparisons is, they'll compare average GDP, which is per capita GDP, and that is really disingenuous, because if you look at the United States and how wealth is distributed, it's like a wine glass. It's like a very thin wine glass, and so all the wealth is at the top, and then it very quickly narrows into a very long, narrow stem. And so the average in that kind of distribution is going to be very skewed. And so like you said, the mean, the median is a much better metric with which to actually measure things. But even when you do that, you've got to remember the context. You remember the context of World War II. The United States was the unrivaled, tremendous superpower beneficiary, while their current rivals today were burned out husks of societies, totally destroyed and impoverished in every way. And so it's just incredible, what socialism has accomplished in China. and Vietnam. And Vietnam's had even less time because the Vietnam War was just in the 70s. But so and it gets to the this misunderstanding. Liberals, of course, don't know how communists perceive communism, and they don't know how communists perceive capitalism. And so liberals just are using entirely different definitions of those terms, right? And so that makes, again, they're disconnected from reality. In their little ideological bubble, these terms mean certain things. And, to those of us who use a different framework, well, capitalism doesn't mean to us what capitalism means to them, and the same is true of socialism. So it's another difficulty, and it's why we got to talk about frameworks, and we've got to educate people on frameworks. Like you gotta realize that your framework is a particular framework, but there's a whole nother framework that you can learn that'll help you understand, what we're saying, and actually what we say is really going on. Until you understand our framework, you don't even understand where we're coming from when we try and explain to you what is really going on. But so yeah, I would like it, Ian. Can you get to the comments? Or did you find any good comments? Does anybody have any engagement with us about what we're saying?
We had some Dust comments. I was surprised you didn't want I don't know. I kept meaning to respond to it and never got to it. And I don't know if Dust is still with us. We have Jace Hart, who we responded to. I don't know if he's still with us either. Those are our two guys for the evening. Solidarity.
So Dust, I mean, we agree with this. Little no difference between the different factions of the imperialist duopoly. No, of course, Democrats, Republicans, they are not going to be pursuing. They're going to have different aesthetics. They're going to say different things, but they're going to be pursuing the exact same agenda, which is something that's difficult for liberals to understand because, again, they're just kind of disconnected from reality. Let's talk about Iran and how it's going to progress. I don't think it's up to the West anymore, right? So Iran is going to dictate when the conflict ends, if the conflict ends, and they're going to be dictating kind of the terms of the conflict ending. I agree with you. I think we're in agreement that a ground invasion is not going to happen. They haven't done the necessary preparation for that, and it's just not possible. They can start doing a preparation for that, and then in 5 or 6 months, they could actually do it. But the whole time, Iran's going to be doing what they can to stop it. So I really just see what's going on as wrecking the Middle East and keeping it from being able to export energy. And I think the U.S. is fine. The Western oligarchy. I think the Western oligarchy is fine with that. I think that Western oligarchs in Europe are going to have a tough time dealing with their population because their population is going to be sacrificing extremely more than the population in the United States is going to be asked to sacrifice. They're already energy dependent, and Middle East is really necessary. Middle East oil exports for the quality of life for Western Europeans, and as that gets destroyed, they're not going to have any. They're going to be really sacrificing in a way that people in the United States aren't going to be having to sacrifice. So, can you see any silver lining from the perspective of humanity on how it could go in the Middle East or West Asia that I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's I don't think that's tenable. It's a question of how much destruction is Iran able to endure. I think a lot, and there's a fight, and it's also the USA's ability to conventionally harm them with air power is finite because we're just not making those.
Yes,
that's
a very important point.
Yes, so the question is the USA going to eat a loss? I mean, I think there's three options. There's one, USA eats a loss. It doesn't go further than this. Option two is a ground invasion. And there's kind of two sub options in that one. Do they actually try to put together a ground invasion that's big enough to defeat Iran, or does Trump send in an insufficient ground force. So, just convinced that this small token force he sends in will work, like they tried in Russia or the Cuban Bay of Pigs. Even is he going to do something like that? And the third option is that they go to nukes. Now, with that's the question. I don't think the USA is going to nuke someone, because that is historically the USA has been actually anybody's been unwilling to go to nukes, because that's an invitation. It's a bad precedent. We did not use nukes in Korea or Vietnam, even though the military wanted to, because China at the time, the U.S., the Soviet Union, and then China had nukes. But there's that wild card of Israel also has nukes. Will Israel push the red button and start nuking Iran? I think that's a very important question to ask. And, would they do that if it came to it? And what would be the response to it? What would happen after they did that? I think that's a pretty crucial question to ask.
So if we ask ourselves, is the transnational oligarchy willing to burn it all down instead of allowing someone else to have control, which would be Iran, a sovereign state? What are they going to choose? And so I can definitely see them even sacrificing Israel, in order to remove Iran from, having control of that region. Like let Iran have control of it. There's going to be nothing there. It's going to be a radioactive waste. They're not going to be able to export any energy, and it's not going to impede our overall objective of total global hegemony, because now China's been weakened. They can't access any of that oil in the Middle East. The United States has plenty of oil. Our military is still, powerful. So no, I could see definitely, nuclear weapons destroying the region.
I mean, it's a new. I mean, it's not. I don't think it. I mean, that question. I don't think it's even an oligarchy question. I know we have this comment here that individuals are not the driver of history. That might be true, but in the context of a nuclear war, when you have a guy who can push the button, when you have people who physically in their hands, so to speak, have those nuclear weapons. I mean, and those guys decide, well, you know what, Israel is about to cease to exist. We are going to nuke Iran, and maybe Washington say, no, don't nuke it. Well, it's the Israelis who physically have the nukes. If they decide they personally want to do it, they can.
Yeah.
Because
I don't think that doesn't contradict what Dust is saying. Both are true, right? Both can be true. The individual is not driving this thing, but the individual can definitely make decisions within the the class, the overall arc of class conflict and oppositional class interest. So again, I mean, it's not like one person is responsible for everything that's going on. Everything that's going on is a result of class conflict, but definitely individuals in places of power make decisions and have behaviors that are going to affect the trajectory and the course of human history. I mean, but both are true. Like, you got to understand, we're not saying that individuals don't do things or make choices. We're saying that the driver of history is not an individual or individuals. It is, class struggle, oppositional class interest, the desire of a certain class to rule over the other class. And so, but what you're saying is there could be a split within the ruling establishment. Most of the Western ruling establishment would be opposed to going nuclear, whereas it is up to a particular faction within the ruling establishment that might overrule the consensus. And that is a perfectly plausible scenario that could be true. But I mean, Israel would be, I think, destroying itself, right? Like, it would be the end of Israel if they nuked Iran. But that's why I think the opposite might be true, right? Like, I think it might be the Western countries pushing Israel to do it. And, Israel would do it because not for Israel, but they'll be doing it for the global, the transnational global elite. Like, I don't think it's going to happen unless
the idea is that no nuclear armed state is going to accept defeat without using their nukes if they have them. So that's the main reason no one has tried to restart the conflict with North Korea, because they have nukes, even when they were in a famine. they had nukes.
Yeah, and it might be enticing. It might be enticing enough for the transnational oligarchy because Iran does not have nukes, and they might think there's a sliver of a chance, and we better just take it because if we don't take this small chance, it's certain. It's a certain loss. So that could be their calculation. It's just crazy. It is just crazy that we're seeing this. That Trump did what he did, and we are where we are. The Straits of Hormuz, like, is Iran going to relinquish control of the Straits? Does the West have the power to force Iran to open the Straits? Right? They don't. So Iran has the cards. Can the West stop Iran from using their drones and missiles against Israel and the Gulf states? They don't have the power to do that. So they have created this circumstance. They have created this situation where Iran has control over the planet, over the global economy, and so again, I think that this is, a totally acceptable option for the transnational oligarchy, and I think they're going to keep pushing things to the point where we'll have $400 a barrel oil in 4 months, and we're going to have a collapse of the global economy. This is an acceptable outcome from the perspective of the transnational oligarchy, because again, they are in the process of destroying the old system that is no longer working for them and creating a new system. And this new system is going to be based on principles of power and access to resources and real strategic, cold calculations of hegemony and of destroying rivals and bringing down rivals. So again, I've always said China won 15, 20 years ago. Like these grand strategies, these master plans are going to fail. The question is, when is the West going to understand that? When are they going to acknowledge and accept defeat, accept the lack of global hegemony, accept China as a more powerful entity on the planet, and learn to coexist in that paradigm? They haven't made that decision. They are still struggling to, find a different path. And to what extent are they willing to go to win, to not have to deal with China as a much powerful rival? That's the question. And I just think they're hubristic enough. They're not, and also the whole system, like I call it an inexorable drive for global domination, because it's not like one person can stop things. It's not like they can, develop this understanding that, hey, what we're doing is wrong and put a stop to it. It's like it's a self-perpetuating system, and it's been set in motion. And it's not like individuals can really stop it. Like Jeffrey Sachs, he's a good liberal. He sees the folly of this, and he's pulling his hair out. Hey, what are we doing? What are we doing? But then you have, the Lindsey Grahams that, he's not threatened by any of this. His constituency, his power, they're all full on Christian Zionists. So he knows he can just talk about, destroying Iran and siding with Israel before America, and it's only going to go good for him. But anyway, so that's part of the calculation. Is the system is not like there's a cabal of people in a room that have control over the policies. It's like an automated system that's been activated, and it's just rolling out. And there's not a lot that even if they wanted to really save it. So for that reason, I am preparing for the fact that they're not going to be able to admit defeat to take the L. That's just probably not going to happen. And so we're going to see things continue to deteriorate. And, it's going to be the power of Russia, the power of China, the power of Iran, that are going to force, compliance and a stop to, what the West is doing. But, I just wish they would, make rational judgments, rational decisions, and say, this is stupid. We're going to have to learn to coexist. And that decision kind of in a way can't be made, and it's definitely not being made. I told you were in for a long lecture, Ian.
No. I think, the issue is how far it
Yeah.
collapses, because there are nukes, because there's a lot of nukes involved. If Israel goes down, they might decide to take everybody down with them. There is the Samson option. I think it's a good time to bring up the Samson option that they have directly threatened to take the world down with them if they go down. USA has a very serious collapse. Well, that's a point of concern, because it has the second largest nuclear arsenal in the world. That could be in the hands of, well, whoever. It's a very hazardous. It's a very hazardous time in human history, I would say.
Yeah. I always mess up the quote, but it's like, centuries will go by, nothing will happen, and then a couple days will go by, everything will happen.
Yes.
So we're kind of in that time. It's really interesting, but it's just frustrating how disconnected and detached from reality the people of the United States are. They've really enjoyed the luxury of being detached and not having to worry. And they've had the luxury of embracing these nonsense narratives, about how, we care about freedom, justice, democracy. And those are the values that our country's based on. And so it's been really easy for people to enjoy the privilege of living in the imperial core and just, not having to worry about, but in reality, like, as human beings, it is our moral obligation. It's the moral obligation of human beings to be aware, to understand what is going on, and to, advocate and struggle for justice and just the improvement of humanity. And when we see, things that are destroying humanity, it's our obligation to speak out. And the Americans are immoral. It is an immoral act. They've been able to get away with being immoral for a very long time, and part of that is the liberal indoctrination. But that luxury is coming to an end. People are not going to be able to just live in their own little social bubbles, totally oblivious to world events and to what is going on. And so that bubble is going to come to an end. And, we need to be able to explain to them clearly and succinctly in a way that makes sense, what the fuck is going on. Because you're going to have the liberalism and the media telling them all sorts of lies, trying to get them to blame China, to blame Iran, blah, blah, blah. And as people are having to sacrifice and suffer, they're really going to try and, for the first time in their lives, really try and, what's going on, guys? What is it? You ready to wrap it? Hour and a half, Ian. You ready to?
Yeah, I think this is a good wrapping up point. It was a good show, though.
Okay, we had quite a few viewers on our last episode that Ian and I did, and I don't know what the key is. I think it's just YouTube being nice to us every couple months. But we had a good, 3K views at least on our previous episode. We'll see how we do today. But definitely, if you're watching, I think we're saying useful things. We're having useful discussions. I think these are important discussions. And if you think there's things that average normies can benefit from hearing us talk like this, please share. I think they can benefit. Maybe sometimes I'm too hard on them. Maybe I need to be more gentle. I don't know. But hopefully we get tons of views like last episode. But we'll find out. So Ian, maybe Friday we might reconvene on Friday. Okay. I got nothing planned. I should be available. So and who knows what'll happen by then. I mean, things are going so quickly. So thank you, Ian, for joining me. Thank you, everyone, for watching. We will reconvene Friday evening for Ian. See you then. Bye.